Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us this morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay. A little louder? Okay. Yeah, thanks for hanging out on this holiday weekend, too, especially, and on a topic of justice, which is not the most jolly topic to be talking about in the morning. So I'm really glad you guys are here. I thought, since the topic is a little serious, I thought to lighten the mood a little bit, we'd start with a few lawyer jokes, because I'm a lawyer, and who doesn't like lawyer jokes? So I got a couple on the screen. Hopefully they can show up okay. I'll read it to you if you can't see it. But this is Moses bringing down the Ten Commandments, and a lawyer raises his hand saying, "Just a minute, I happen to be a lawyer." This is I love this joke because I've caught myself doing this. I don't know if you have friends or colleagues that say, "Oh, I happen to be a lawyer." Nothing good follows that statement. So the second is a couple of doctors leaving the ER. One comments to the other, "I don't feel quite as fulfilled when I saved a lawyer." And the last one is, "You have a pretty good case, Mr. Pitkin. How much justice can you afford?" I like ending with this one because it's kind of on theme today, the topic of justice. And I like these jokes, and I struggle through them because obviously they tell a side of law that has become, the stereotype, lawyers being greedy or unjust or manipulative. And it's interesting. We have this dichotomy of law in society, right? I mean, in the abstract, law is celebrated as an essential component to a civilized society. The rule of law is an essential feature and a promoter and a structure for justice. But then on the other side, it seems like more and more these days, law is shaped by corporations and wealthy individuals, certainly for their benefit and to the detriment of everyone else. So which is it, right? Is law a celebrated pillar of justice in our society? Is it the essential component to a civilized society? Or is it operating right now almost to frustrate justice or maybe indifferent to justice? Which one is it? And as an attorney, especially when I see jokes like this, I kind of struggle through that in my head because, this is my profession and I'm supposed to be kind of on the front line of that. And how am I presenting myself to the world as an attorney? And I think it's a mixture of both right now. I mean, it should be a pillar of justice, right? I mean, it was a noble profession. It was one of the three noble professions historically: law, medicine, and theology. And it was, at the top because it was seen as a way to promote justice and to have law, a rule of law in society. But it seems like we've strayed rather far from that these days. It seems like too many times we turn on the TV to see lawyers frustrating justice in some way. And so that's something that is constantly in my head and I'm grappling with. So I thought to back up a little bit, maybe we should try to define justice. And I think this is a really hard thing to define because first, it's different in every culture. There are cultural components to it that make justice different from one place to another geographically. The other is that there are so many components to justice. There's philosophy, there's ethics, there's morality, there's law, there's politics, there's economics. There's all of these components that people talk about when they talk about justice. And so pinning down a definition can be challenging. But I'm going to try to do that anyway. So I looked at all of these different conversations about justice in the context of philosophy or ethics, and the different subcategories of justice that you probably hear about: social justice, environmental justice, procedural justice. It goes on and on and on. And I tried to distill down some kind of core elements that keep coming back when people talk about justice. And some of those that I picked up on is impartiality, fairness, some result of equality or greater equality. And so I kind of took those components and made a running simple definition for myself. See what you think. Conforming our actions to truth in a way that achieves greater equality. What do you think? I don't know. I'm still working on it. I think that is a simplified way to capture the spirit of justice, at least. I hope that's that's what it is. And I think the key component that I want to talk about today is the truth aspect, because today we're living in a world of alternative facts. We see that hashtag all over the place, and I keep seeing popping up more and more. I don't know if you've seen this in media or the journals or research or stuff like that, but they're talking about this time, the time that we're living in, as the post-fact era, which you stop and you think, post-fact? What is that? I mean, it's really moral relativism, right? But that's the way they're defining this era, because relativism and alternative facts are just popping up all around us. And I think when that happens, and when we lose sight of truth, we lose sight of justice. And I think that's what we're seeing in the news almost every day. We're seeing instances of injustice that are created in part by a false narrative, by alternative facts. And this kind of goes to the core of what I do as an attorney, and it kind of bugs me, because as the legal profession, I mean, we should be on the front lines of truth seeking. I mean, that's essentially what our job is supposed to be, to find truth and to work with facts in a way that our client has for us. And I think this is the area where lawyers have really kind of lost their way, is this manipulating facts to create a narrative that benefits their client. And lawyers often even justify that as being a zealous advocate for our clients. We're required ethically to do this. And so I think the more we kind of came off the path of truth, the more we were able to manipulate situations and facts to achieve a good result for a client, essentially. And I think I think in the legal field, there's no premium on honesty. I think that's probably an easy way to put it. And most people don't think that lawyers are the most honest people. There was a Gallup poll a few years ago that said 6% of people polled thought that lawyers were honest people. 87% said that they lied some or most of the time. So I think that truth component is really lacking. And for myself, wanting to kind of ground myself in truth, how do I kind of go countercultural to what my profession is doing? In law firms, in client meetings, you're almost pushed to kind of massage the facts a little bit. And how do I, wanting to be a truth seeker, kind of go against that? And I think this is where the creative community really has an advantage, all of us. I think art, no matter what form it is, I mean, we have writers in the room, we have painters, we have photographers. There's all kinds of different forms of art. And I think art oftentimes explores the world in a very real and honest way. And I think artists like to look at things very honestly and truthfully. Art sees both the beauty and the pain in the world. I mean, it's exploring both sides, and it grapples with a lot of different forms of emotion. So I think that's a real advantage for us, when we're looking at the world honestly, because we kind of naturally do that in the art that we create. For me, that's usually photojournalism. I do a lot of photojournalism and writing on the side when I'm not being a lawyer, and I love that component, that creative component, because the lens and the pen are kind of my tools for seeing the world with greater clarity, and hopefully I can use those to help others do the same. And it helps me to stop and observe the world around me, to look at what's going on around me truthfully and honestly, and to grapple with the issues that we see in our community every day. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of how this is kind of this idea of truth and truth-seeking and justice comes into play in my own work. The first two photos you see here are taken. They were taken in Chinatown, downtown, and I was an attorney for about 6 years before I even picked up a camera. And so for 6 years, I walked all over the streets of downtown, going to meetings, going to lunch, going to the pubs, commuting back and forth to work. And there was so much that I ignored, so much that I either was just indifferent to and ignored because I was busy, or I passed quick judgments, walking down the street. And I never really stopped until I picked up a camera. And when I picked up a camera and I was more intentional about just kind of seeing my community in an honest way, I took a couple of these photos. And I think what it really did for me was it made me explore the humanity in everyday life. And it made me look at people's faces and realize that there's a human component to this. They have issues that I can't possibly fathom, that I don't even know. And it really made me re-examine how I approach people, and to understand that everyone needs grace and respect and compassion. So this wasn't an earth-shattering justice campaign that I went on, but it did help me to at least change my perspective and change my attitude towards people. And I also started to do some homeless outreach as a result of that. The next two photos are food. I love food. I have a food and wine blog, and I love exploring different cuisines and different styles of food. The picture here with the chef plating, this was taken in Honolulu. He's a local chef, an amazing chef. I love how creative he is. I love the attention to detail that a lot of chefs have, and just the art that they can create on a plate. Contrasting that, this picture was taken in Indonesia at a local street market, and for me, it kind of shows the greedy side of food, right? The side that we don't really think about. And it shows that, not all food is destined for the gourmet plate. There are different types of food that we eat and different circumstances that we eat it. And it shows a lot of times inequalities in our world. And so, looking at food in an honest way, kind of most of the time before photography, I would just eat it and have fun and talk to friends, and that was kind of the extent of it. But when I started exploring it through photography and through writing and telling stories about these people, it made me look at it in a justice lens, right? And I thought, well, what can I do about this? And one thing was just to be educated about it and to know what happens in food production and the results of food production, to look for sustainable farming practices and sustainable farmers, to try and buy local and eat local whenever I can, like these amazing baked items back there. I mean, it's not earth-shattering, but when I think about things in daily life from a justice perspective, it helps us to kind of reframe our thinking. The last is just a couple of images to discuss the point of law, getting back to law. So when I was practicing as a lawyer for those 6 years before the camera, I was kind of trying to rise in the ranks of the law firm. I was trying to do as the best job that I could for my clients and kind of get the best clients possible, which means the biggest and the richest clients possible, to be honest. And that was kind of my path. And then once I started, picking up a camera and walking around the neighborhood and talking to people and taking photos and writing about what some local businesses were doing, I realized that there's this amazing community that we have, both in the creative community where a lot of you are from, but then just in the broader small business, local business, family business community that are doing really, really interesting things, really cool things, and they're just really, really cool people. And they were struggling along. A lot of times they would tell me stories about how they were doing their business, but they didn't really understand some legal aspects to it, and there were some business things that they didn't really understand, and they were just kind of muddling along. And I said, well, have you thought about, going to a law firm, or have you thought about trying to find a consultant, or, what are you doing about that? And they said, small businesses can't do that. It's just too much money. It's out of our budget. And it made me start to think, there's an inequality here in legal services, right? I mean, lawyers are often, to the highest bidder, and there are a lot of bidders out there that drive up the cost, and that kind of leaves a lot of small businesses vulnerable to legal risk that they just don't know what to do. And so as a result of that conversation that I was having on a creative side, I ended up talking to a couple of partners of mine now, and we started Candela Hawaii, which is a company that's tailored for small businesses, for legal services, for business services, et cetera, because we saw this need, and we saw small businesses that really could use those types of services in this community. And we just thought that everyone should have the right to thrive, and we just weren't seeing that particularly in the legal field. So, you know, we thought this is something that we need to do professionally as well. So I want to just kind of wrap up here, and we can get to some Q&A, but I want to make justice relevant, because I think a lot of times we think of justice as marching on Washington or passing landmark legislation or forming an NGO to combat poverty, and those are all amazing things, but you know, justice is also in the everyday, and there are things that we can do every day that help us to not be indifferent to it. And I think when we're not thinking about these topics on a daily basis, there's room for alternative facts to get in there and to manipulate what's going on in our world. So I think simple things we can do every day that will just kind of help this conversation continue. Couple of quick things, and then there's a couple of questions you can kind of be thinking yourself. First is just be a truth seeker. I think truth and honesty is lost in this world, and I think as a result, injustice can really get root in a lot of areas. And I think when we just look at the world honestly, there's a lot going on. There's a lot that will bug us. There's a lot that will excite us too. There was a famous photojournalist that did a lot of photojournalism and documentary photography on war. So he's in Kosovo and he's in Iraq, and someone asked this question that I just loved. They said, how do you go on, like, seeing the horrors of war all the time, and like going from war to war? How do you go on? And he said, you know, I see a lot of horrible things, but I also see a lot of amazing things. You know, when I look at this situation honestly and try to document it honestly, there's a lot of compassion, there's a lot of grace, there's a lot of love that he sees even in, you know, conflict-ridden countries. So, you know, it just kind of reminded me it's not just seeing the world in a pessimistic way, but, you know, being honest and truthful with the whole thing. So just be a truth seeker. And then second, to do justice, just talk about it. It's as simple as that. I think if you are observing the world intentionally and honestly, and you see something and it bugs you or it excites you, talk about it first, you know, with yourself. Just kind of internally process it and think about that. You know, have I had, you know, a discussion about this, and who would care about this issue? And going back up to the first questions, you know, how am I affecting this situation, or am I? And then tell a friend, talk to a friend about it. Go have some beers at a pub and talk about it. Talk to your family about it, and just kind of talk about these issues in an honest way. And I think that is probably our greatest tool in combating alternative facts and moral relativism, because, you know, if we're not simply indifferent to what's going on, but we're at least talking about it and brainstorming ideas about it, it's harder for those alternative narratives to kind of gain root. And finally, I think just for me, and going back to the first couple of photos I was putting up there earlier, everybody needs grace, compassion, and respect. I mean, I think that's just fundamental. And I think when we're indifferent to what's going on around us, we kind of forget that. And we just kind of forget the humanity that's going on around us. We forget that the person sitting next to you has problems that they're going through. You have problems that you're going through. And, you know, just to approach people with that in mind, and with some compassion, with some respect about what they're going through. And I think when you do that, and you have conversations that have that at its core, it helps you to see justice in a different way and have a justice mindset. So that's it for me. I think we can open it up for a Q&A. I think there's a mic that's... Yeah, so the question was, are there services available, legal services available for homeless if there's something that they need? And the answer is yes, there's several services. There's legal aid, which is downtown, and then there's Volunteer Legal Services of Hawaii, which is in the Kaka'ako area. And both of those have different programs depending on the issue that you're involved with. You might go to one or the other, but both of them have services for not only homeless but low income and poor people. Yeah.
How does you identifying as a truth seeker affect how you would take on a client based on what side you see the truth on?
That's a great question. That's difficult in two ways. First, it's the initial meeting and determining what the issue is and whether you can help them. And then the second is being candid with a client all the way through. And things are going to come up, in a representation where the client's not going to like it. And the way I approach that is, when I first meet a potential client and they're talking about an issue, I think I'm candid with them right from the start. And I say, I can do X, Y, and Z for you, but I'm not going to do this. And I think you want me to do this, and I'm not going to do it. A situation like that. And if they say, that's what I want you to do, then I won't take them. It's more complicated, I think, when you have a client that you've done a lot of business with, that you have a pretty good relationship with, and they come to you and they say, I need this done. I need to lean on you for this because an issue came up. That I think is not a true representation of what's going on. And I have to be very candid with them in those situations. And I've lost clients because of it. Yeah, but I think truth has to be the ultimate guidepost for that. Yeah.
You mentioned a blog
Yeah.
for photography, and how do you find it? Where is it on? It's on the web.
My blog?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my blog is just my name, Seth T. Buckley.
Okay.
SETHTBUCKLEY.com.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, I was just thinking like injustice and transparency, especially in like photography or art, and everybody kind of has an Instagram lens and they're capturing their life in some form of transparency. But what kind of like line is that in related to creative art with representing something justly or in transparency or putting a creative lens on it, in your opinion?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of commentary about this in the context of photojournalism and documentary photography, which is primarily what I do. There's lots of different forms of photography, and some forms can be extremely creative to the point where you don't even realize it's a photograph. It looks like it's from outer space or something, which is great. But in documentary photography and photojournalism, there's a very strong ethical discussion about how we should do that and what we should manipulate creatively or not creatively in the environment. And where I typically fall on this is I try not to manipulate the environment at all. I try to take photos that are as close to what I'm observing and experiencing as possible. So for me, I'll crop things. If I take a photograph, I'll crop some things out of an image that lend to it being a little bit too busy. But I'm not going to go in and take things out of the image, Photoshop post-process. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to change colors. I'm not going to change expressions. I'm not going to take people out because I want that situation to be as truthful and honest to the situation as I can have it. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm interested in how you feel the personal creative development you've gone through has influenced your approach to practicing law, or your perspective on it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a lot. And when I first got into photography, I thought it was just going to be an outlet, a creative outlet that was on the side. And I found that photography, and in particular writing, creative writing, changed a lot of the way I practiced. And in writing, I think that's probably the biggest thing that people would see is in the writing because, as probably most of you have experienced, legal documents can be really complex and there's a lot of legalese that doesn't really make sense and no one knows what this contract means. And when I started doing more creative writing and blogging and journalistic style writing, I realized that the point of writing is to be clear with what you're talking about and to tell a story. And so I brought that into my legal writing. I try to be as clear and concise as I can, and I try to develop a story as much as I can so that people understand what a contract is about, or litigation. And I did some litigation previously. And creating, the court documents in a way that was clear and storytelling really helped the judges in a litigation, and it helps the parties in contracts. So I think that's probably the most tangible. But I think in photography and just being creative and kind of training myself to be honest with what's going on around me helps me to look at cases and be honest with what's going on in a case, and to point out things that a client might not have thought about, and say, this is something that you really need to be thinking about. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
All right. If there's no more questions, let's hear it again for Seth.